So the way that I tackled my fear, and the way that I dealt with it, because I could tell quite quickly and quite early in the process that it was my fear that was affecting my confidence, and that it was my lack of confidence that was affecting my fear. There was just no third party there. I really couldn't spot anything that that could be a factor outside of the confidence level. So for me, it was a matter of fixing the confidence so the fear would disappear. Yep. Instead of focusing on the fear and telling myself, well, just press the button, just do it. No, I was more analytical about it. And I went onto the other part of the loop and said, well, I'm going to fix my confidence first. And then hopefully that'll get rid of my fear. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. I worked on my confidence level. And my confidence level could only, right? Because then we went into another loop, a sub-loop, where the confidence level is linked to performance, from a psychological standpoint. If you don't have confidence, you can't perform. And if you're not performing, you can't feed that confidence level. So you get into that second sub-loop, which sucks as well. So there was a clear link between performance and confidence. And once my brain was able to understand that clearly and identify, that was the next step that needed to be taken, then I dove deeper, right, into that particular rabbit hole, and decided that I needed to find a way in which I could test my performance levels with as little emotion intervention as possible. Now, I've always been somebody who says to anybody who tells me, you got to trade without emotion, I always call that BS, because that ain't never going to happen. Yeah? We're not robots, we're not machines. Emotions are always going to be there. It's a matter of how much under control they are at any given time that determines whether you let them rule you or not. But from the performance aspect, I needed to find a way to lock that fear up somewhere so I could test my performance without the fear, right? Even if it was only temporary, because I always knew that fear would come back if I didn't get the results. Yeah. So what I did is, and this is just my journey, and it's not necessarily something that everybody's going to be okay with, or is going to want to do, or is going to find beneficial in any way. Again, this is very personal to me. But I basically delved into the data analysis and performance tracking world, where I really spent hours that I wish I could have back. I mean, they served a purpose, but it created a couple of years where, I only had one thing in my mind, and having a one-track mind in life is really not the best way to go. There's some things that fall by the wayside that should never fall by the wayside, no matter how focused you are on your job. There's always things that are more important than your job and your work. But anyway, that's a topic, that's a story for another day. But I delved deep into understanding statistics, probabilities, odds, edges, yeah, and went deep into data tracking and data performance and performance tracking. So what that meant is that I focused on what made the edge perform, yeah, and then made sure that I set a certain number of instances in which that edge or that setup or whatever I was studying at the moment would have to be executed before I can come up with a conclusion that it was an ineffective edge, right? Or even before I could come to the conclusion that it was an effective and valid edge, right? So trading journals and studying, how does this setup perform on this asset on a Wednesday night after, PMIs the day before, or, what is the maximum forward excursion and adverse excursion of all my positions based on the conditions X, Y, and Z. And, so basically what I did is a lot of study of probabilities and patterns, and just putting all of that together through tracking data in a trading journal, right? And then the revelation, again, without going into too much detail about the journey itself, we can talk about that if that's interesting to anybody later on, or if you want more details. But the revelation of the whole at the end of the whole process was, my God, there's an edge here. There's an edge that works. So why on earth am I afraid to execute it? Yeah. And is that the reason why, I wasn't performing or why I was not trading enough? Yeah. And that's exactly it. So when I was able to visualize and see on paper through my own research and through my own experimentation and through my own practice, the edge. So when that edge stopped being a buzzword and became a set of numbers in front of my eyes, that's what changed everything for me. Because then it was just a matter of, okay, I'm about to take this trade. On one side, I've got my demon talking to me saying, man, you're afraid. You're not going to take it. And on the other side, I have the empirical data that I have collected through doing a lot of work to show me that the edge is effective. And then I started going with that edge every single time and taking it, right? And taking leaps of faith little by little until I got more and more consistent. And I went from executing my setups in the early days, maybe 50% of the time correctly, to 60%, to 70%. And I would track all of this. All of this was in my tracking system, right? One of the big things in my trading data tracking time and everything was tracking the errors that I was making and making sure that they were not reoccurring, right? So I would track at the end of a week how many setups I spotted versus how many I took, yeah? And I tried to make sure that that number got as close as possible to 100%, with the passing of time. And yeah, well, it was complex because it was not just one setup, it was multiple setups under multiple circumstances. So there was a lot of work to do because I had to, I couldn't discriminate between one type of setup and the other. Yeah, I say, okay, these things line up. My trade plan says that when these things line up, I'm okay to take it. I've got to take it, and I have to do it 100% of the time because the probabilities, the odds, right, the statistical odds of that edge manifesting itself are only applicable and valid if you have taken every single opportunity that comes in. The moment that you don't take one, you're polluting that edge slightly. Yeah, because you're distorting the data that you're coming out of because you're not being consistent in the application and you're not giving the probabilities, the law of averages a chance to come up and shine, right? Because especially if you've already looked at the paper, the empirical data, the numbers, and they tell you that there's an edge, that there's a statistical advantage that you have, right? When that is there, there's absolutely no excuse not to take those, right? Now that obviously markets change, things happen, black swans fly in. We've all gone through Brexit, we've all gone through COVID, we've all gone through a bunch of other maybe smaller, black swans, and market dynamics change and you need to adapt. But once you're in that mode where you've got your edge down numerically and you believe in it and you're able to execute on a consistent basis, so that the number of instances needed of that setup or set of setups to be executed for the law of averages to show up and perform properly, once that's completed, then you can focus on other things. Once you're trading in probabilities and your fear is gone and your confidence level is up, and you're broken out of these loops, and these sub loops, then you can focus on understanding market dynamics, and then and anything that changes. You guys have seen me trade enough that you've seen me modify some of my approaches, right, to certain things. And when you look at the progress that you've made, throughout your training and the time that you've been learning to trade, you need to be able to spot, where those key points have been, where you've left something behind that was an obstacle, and you're ready to focus on something else. And fear, and eliminating fear, for me, was the one that opened all the other opportunities, right? Because then I was able to manipulate not manipulate is probably a bad word for this. I was able to adapt the edge to changing circumstances. I learned sentiment inside and out, right? I learned how to read central banks a bit better. I worked on being able to understand what central banks are looking for in terms of macro, and focus on that. So all of those extra things, I think, that I was able to focus on would have been impossible to focus on if I had a core problem such as fear still affecting me. And the only way that I found to tackle that fear was to show my stupid brain, right, that there was nothing to fear in taking, proper setups under proper risk management conditions, under portfolio level conditions, under business plan conditions, right, in order for the edge to shine and perform. And that anything outside of that, anything that polluted that series of statistical, probabilities, was going to be to my detriment. And the moment I realized that, I stopped trading in fear. Yep. So that was my kind of venture into, because I know it was blocked at the beginning. I know it was blocking me. I was not trading a lot, and it sucked because a lot of my trade ideas were good, but I was just not in it. I was seeing the price go, and I was like, oh, great, well, bye. I messed up again. I didn't take it. Yeah. And that's the biggest problem. And knowing that if you tackle fear, then it's easier to get better at damage control, because as the secondary part, like I said, it can be very detrimental to damage control execution, because it can prevent you from doing very important protective action at times, that fear. So for me, it happened simultaneously. I didn't have to tackle one and then the other. Once that fear was gone, and I was able to see the edge perform, right, and see my portfolio grow, and my capital grow, I didn't think twice. It didn't, it happened with damage control, and then I went into a damage control phase that lasted, years and years and years of studying damage control and trying to get better than my mentor at it. That was my drive. Come up with new ways of executing it, while protecting capital a bit better, and again, all of it from that point in which fear became a non-issue. Yeah, that doesn't mean that I lost risk aversion, right? I look at my risk aversion, analyze it, and utilize those psychological barriers every day when I look at my portfolio and decide what to do. But from a fear level, from a I'm scared of taking a trade level, that's kind of where